bar 4 to...
Today, I am so very grateful to be joined by Mr. Harry Gregson-Williams. You know him for films like The Chronicles of Narnia, The Equalizer, Shrek, Man on Fire, Enemy of the State, Spy Game, and most recently, Gladiator II. Harry, thank you so much for taking the time to do this today.
So, my pleasure.
Listing off those films, we were just talking about this before, it's almost like going through your life. You have different memories of things that were going on. What is it like reflecting on your huge catalog, your filmography, which goes back decades?
Well, that's making the assumption that I reflect, Ashton. I try not to. I'm not really a guy who looks backwards. I gotta try and look forwards. But no, I do. I catch myself sometimes, and I know how lucky I've been to have been involved in many of the films that I've done. And sometimes things happen, like for instance this weekend there's a big song and dance with Gladiator, premieres and things. But one touching moment last night at the LA premiere of Gladiator II, I could see a family were watching the film. Their seats were quite near mine, and as it finished, their daughter came over to me and she was quite shy and almost like trembling and said, "Can I please tell you how much I enjoyed?" And I thought she was about to say the score, and she said, "Narnia." It meant something to her. Actually it's funny, with those films, those Narnia films, they touched people in a specific way, not necessarily my music, but I suppose it's the religious element or the overtone of something. It means something a little bit more than most films. People will say, "Oh God, Shrek was the soundtrack to my youth," or blah 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 blah. What they really mean is that Smash Mouth song, which has got nothing to do with me. But yes, yeah, I don't really reflect on things, but there are little occasions like, as I say, last night with that young girl, and I could tell she really meant it, that something about those Narnia movies really touched her.
I can say that your Narnia score has had a huge impact on my life and my love of film music. There is something special in those scores. What are your memories of, because you worked on that 2004, 2005, yes, back when you were working on Kingdom of Heaven,
yeah,
that period of time.
Yeah.
What are your memories of how those ideas for Narnia came to you, the thematic ideas?
Well, I remember when Andrew Adamson called me and said, "Look, man, it looks like they're going to hire me to direct the Narnia movies. I really want you to do it." And we'd become really good friends on the Shrek series, which he directed. But all I could think about was The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. It was a book that my mother read to me when I was really little, and I loved it then. But I couldn't remember the specifics about it. So when I revisited it, I said to Andrew, "Should I read the book or your script first?" I'd reread the book, or he said, no, just the script. But I didn't listen to him. I read the book first. I had to remind myself, and then the script. And I really liked what they'd done with it, with the script. But he had quite a deal shooting that movie. I remember he told me that they were going to do all the snowy stuff in Romania. I think I'm right in saying Romania, in November, and they arrived in Romania in November. And for the first time in 100 years, there was no snow. That's why they picked Romania, because it was definitely going to be snowy. There was no snow at all. So all that had to be fake. And, I remember conversations I remember saying to, doing that wonderful scene where Lucy first goes through the wardrobe and appears in Narnia, and it's all snowy and glittering. And I was like, "But Andrew, wouldn't her breath be like, it's like, Harry, there was no freaking snow. It wasn't cold. So he said, look, I've got a couple of golden bullets. You know, I'm going to be able to probably get them to spend money on visual effects in a couple of shots, but yeah, it'll have to be that first shot. So there's a little sort of mystification that comes out of Lucy's mouth as she goes through the wardrobe.
What about the battle sequence? What's your memory of scoring that?
I remember overthinking it, first of all, and thinking about it in sort of sections. And then coming up with the idea of using the little tune, the be-da-da-dum, which had been just a tiny little sort of folk tune that Hugh Marsh had played on baritone violin, I think, or electric violin of some sort, when Lucy first meets Tumnus at the lamppost. And I remember thinking, look, if maybe it was kind of the Narnia folk tune. Maybe this is the tune, because I try to use my main theme there. I try to wedge it into the charging armies, and it was too heroic. There wasn't enough tension, and I needed to use it later in the sequence when we needed heroics. So yeah, once I figured out that it was actually that tune, slowed down, put into 4, I think, as opposed to 3, or 6 is how I wrote it. Yeah, once I figured out which theme I should use. I wanted to get a drum beat, which wasn't like tom-toms. And I think a friend of mine, Justin Burnett, who had often done little bits of programming for me probably on Man on Fire and movies like that, which was his forte, not so much the Narnia things. But I think I called him and said, look, man, do you have any samples that it could be almost rocks or stones, but something organic? I don't want it to be like tom-toms or like a drum kit. And he said, give me a moment. He sent me back some samples, and I think that's how I built that sequence. Thank you, Justin. But it takes an army to do these sort of things. And I've never been shy about having people contribute. And, if someone's got a particular strength, like this chap Justin has always been a really good, tasteful programmer in my eyes. I love some of the sounds he comes up. We kind of meet in that place. So, yeah, to give him a call and say, look, man, I'm working on this huge sequence. I haven't got any drums at this point, but I need something that maybe it's rocks, maybe it's wooden things being hit together, but something that's really organic. Those sort of sequences come together bit by bit, and I think instead of thinking of it in sections, I planned modulations more, where I could head towards and modulate. Also the orchestration. So right out of the gate, to use all the brass section, the choir, and the strings wouldn't be a good idea. So how am I going to make it build and have shape and texture? And that, I think that was key to it. Once I knew which melody I was going to use, and then looking at it thinking, wouldn't it be great if the brass came in really hard and you really notice that they're taking the lead at a certain point.
The horn melody.
Yes, and then maybe the choir at a different point. They were probably all contributing to begin with because we needed the weight, but not in such an ostentatious way.
One of the things about you that I admire is that you love working as a team with musicians that you admire. Martin Tillman is one example.
Yeah.
Grace Davidson recently,
Yes,
she did the vocals on The Last Duel.
She did.
Talk to me about the relationship that you have with musicians. And
Well, I love that. I mean, I often, when I'm writing my demos in here, it's, that's really where it all gets done. But I like to, before I share anything with whichever director I'm working with, I want to make sure that there's, I give myself the best chance of not just impressing the director, but of creating something that he can see is going to evolve into a worthwhile score. So I'm not shy about spending money, sometimes my own money, because the studios don't want to come up with speculation. For instance, my friend Martin Tillman, he now lives in Zurich, but I could call him, say, look, man, I've got this line here. Just do me 2 or 3 takes of that, send it back to me, and I'll put it in here. So we'd do that. With vocalists, similarly, it's, samples all very well and good, and actually they're getting, some of the choir samples are unbelievable, right, but they're masked ones. So you mentioned Grace Davison. I mean, you can't expect a sample to sound like that angel. So, in order to do a demo, I got to use some sort of soprano sample. But, her alone in the middle of Abbey Road, Studio One, with the beautiful microphones that they use there, it's just stunning. So I have to wait on her contribution, for instance. On The Last Duel, I was determined to use this countertenor called Yestin Davis, who I'd used on Kingdom of Heaven once before. There was this uncomfortable swooping thing that I was in my head for one of the characters. I forget his name. He's the dark guy, dark character. Was it?
Legree, I believe.
Legree. Right.
Yeah.
It's not something I could do on a sample with a pitch bend thing. I just couldn't do that. And I wanted it to be a slightly unusual vocal texture. And I called Yestin, this guy who was one of the leading countertenors in the world, who I had used on Kingdom, and said, look, man, if I send you, I don't want to send him the film, I actually couldn't send him the film across the internet, he's in England, but if I send you my demo, I want you to give me some swooping things, to any vowels you like, you can choose, you can vary them, but there'll be perfect fourths and perfect fifths, any intervals like that. So anyhow, I send over the music. He sent me many, many, many tracks back. And that's where the juice is for me, really. So I'm never going to use it exactly as he sang it. He doesn't know what's in my mind. He doesn't know what's happening on the screen. So that's where the fun really begins for me. So I'm going to snip things up, go between takes, detune him, maybe harmonize him, put him through a harmonizer, and mess with the sound that he's making. That demo, that's thematic material, I had to have someone contribute to before I played it for Ridley. And it worked a treat, actually. Really liked it. So what's that bloody sound? I said, don't never mind, Ridley. Do you like it? Yeah, no, I love it.
There's a call you get from Mark Streitenfeld back in 2004, 2005, saying, I'm working on a film called Kingdom of Heaven.
Yes.
And Hans is not going to do the film.
No.
And Ridley's listening to your music, expect a call soon.
Yeah.
When you get a call like that, telling you you should expect a call from Ridley Scott,
Yeah.
what's going through your mind, and what was your experience like on that first film?
Well, I can tell you what's going through my mind. I wonder what Tony would think. So I've been working extensively with Tony Scott. We had already done, Enemy of the State, Man on Fire spy game. We'd got that far. Tony was really kind of quite possessive about me, which I liked. You know, it really made me feel like I was his composer. He referred to me as, that's my composer. So I don't know, his brother calling me, particularly as on that call, Ridley said, look, I'm doing post in London, I'll need you to come over here. So I thought he meant, you know, come over here to record it. So I said, yeah, sure, obviously, Red, we could do it at Abbey Road. He's like, no, I need you to come over for like 5 or 6 months. You know, I had just, you know, 2 years previous to that, I just moved out of Hans's studio and set up this amazing studio on Venice Beach. And, you know, everything was wired and plugged in and perfectly. I was just all set to be the best composer I could possibly be, because just the environment was just perfect. And I got to unplug it all. And I mean, you know, it was not a happy thought. And obviously, I couldn't say no. I didn't want to say no. So it's okay, I got off the phone. Right, guys, we just spent 6 months setting up this beautiful, brand new, perfectly wired, positioned studio. Because we got to buy some flight cases and stick it all in there. We're going to London for 6 months.
So when we get to it, I'll show you what we're doing in the film, but we're playing completely counterpart to what's going on. There's all sorts of mass murder going on, carnage, brutality, and and we're going to play the sadness of it all. Here we go. Here's bar 4, 2, 3, 5, and.
That was kind of tricky to get my head around. But once that thought, I put that thought aside, you know, with the excitement of actually working with Ridley, which was very exciting. It was just the geographical thing that was a bit of a bugger to begin with.
What was your impression of Ridley when you first began to work with him?
Well, my first impression of him was on a night at Media Ventures. It must have been Gladiator. I didn't work on Gladiator, the original movie. I was at Hans's studio, Media Ventures. I had my own little room there, and I'd probably done a Shrek by then, and I certainly have done Ants and a couple of the Replacement Killers, a couple of scores. So I was kind of working independently, but I was, you know, still part of Hans's crew, his team. But it was about probably very late at night. One night I was smoking a cigarette on the steps of Media Ventures. And I think a Rolls Royce pulled up, and some guy, big dark overcoat, wafted past me, a waft of cigar smoke. Hans, Hans! He just said Hans as he passed me. I'm like, that way. And I think that was Ridley. He was obviously going in for a meeting. So I hadn't seen him, but I hadn't really spoken to him. But before I actually met Ridley, you know, I had called Tony, said, Tone, so Ridley's just asked me to go to London. He said, fine, be back by April. I said, April? And I think it was, we were in September of 2006 at that point. He said, be back by April. I needed to do Domino.
They can walk in there, they've all got the music, they've never seen it before, but it's well marked and hopefully decently written, and it tells them when they have to play quietly, play loudly, whatever. So we could go, okay, after 4, 3, 4, go. But why not play them the scene with my demo, and they hear it in the headphones with the dialogue up there, and they can understand what I'm trying to do with the music. So we'll listen to the demo. Yes, it's the first time I've made it has to go into battle.
One of the tremendous things in the behind the scenes of the Kingdom of Heaven recording sessions is you playing the orchestra sequences from the film before you record them.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what's your mind? Because that's not a common thing, but
Well, sometimes we wouldn't have time for that. I mean, a lot of composers would say, well, we can't screw around with that. We've got to record 20 minutes of music in this 3-hour session, and that's a challenge in itself. But I mean, obviously the basis of that, I think I learned that probably from my first mentor, which is Richard Harvey, who I worked for between 1990 and 1995 before I came to the States. A really amazing English composer and instrumentalist, a musician. But he used to do that, and it made perfect sense to me, if there was time, to play down my demo, no click track or any of that nonsense, my demo with the dialogue, and swing the monitor around so that the orchestra could see what the heck was going on, and they could see what my intention was, musically. Because I think the temptation would be to assume that just because my score is now on their music stands, they're going to know how to interpret it. Also, it's good. I find it's good for me to settle my mind, especially on a score like this, which is like 100 minutes of music in Gladiator II. Not that I would have forgotten what my cue was like, but just it's a good moment to hear what the heck I was thinking with the dialogue. How is this going to work? And it will remind me, looking at the score, oh yeah, these 2 bars. Don't get all fruity with the orchestra here. There's a bit of dialogue there. I know I want to bring out this cello line. So, we'd listen to it, and my demo should work perfectly without any help underneath whatever's going on screen. And then once the orchestra have looked at that, then it is down to business. Okay, and because we've just looked at it, it will remind me of a few things. So brass in bars 17 to 19, it's mezzo piano here, bring it up. It could be mezzo forte. Just can make more detailed changes before we even play a note. And then, without the picture, forget the picture for now. Now I know what I'm doing. So this picture's still running, but now I can really concentrate on the performance that I need for the score. Not for the soundtrack, or for any of that nonsense. No, for the film. In order to help tell the story of that scene perfectly.
Okay, let's try with the track. See if we've got enough oomph. Let's just play it with Ridley out in the room, see if we can make his knees tremble. Here it comes, bar 5.
when you're sitting in the recording sessions with filmmakers, whether it's Ridley Scott, whether it's Tony, what are the common notes and what are the common conversations that the director is having with you as you're actually on the stage and amid the recording sessions, the kind of feedback that you would get?
I haven't really worked with a director who likes to make too many comments during recording sessions or even show up. Tony Scott never showed up once. He knew the music. He knew every beat of music by that moment because he'd spent so much time with me sitting beside me in my studio. Ridley, not spending so much time, but he knows what he's getting. And at that point, he's like, okay, well, this what use is he at this point? He's not going to, unless he's nervous about something. He didn't come to the Gladiator II recording sessions. He did come to a couple of the Martian sessions, I remember. Into the control room, be listening, and he wanted to contribute, and he maybe made it. I don't remember specifically what he would say, but maybe you could give us a little bit more darkness at this point, or something, and I'd try and make that alteration. But yeah, I've heard of directors who are really pokey in the control room, trying to run the session. It's not something I wish for in my future. I mean, obviously, they can be there and they want to be there, and it's their movie, it's their score. But I think you missed a beat or two as a composer if you've left so much up to interpretation and you've got to the scoring process. I would rather have those notes in my demo, as a reaction to my demos, than I know what I'm doing. Yeah, the Scott brothers not really involved in the recording process or mixing process. Mixing of music, obviously the mix of their movie. very much was always there during the recording sessions. Gone Baby Gone to Town, and Live by Night, but just in a very supportive way. Again, he knew beat by beat what he was going to get, musically.
One of my favorite bits of you, 2005, you're working on Narnia, and in one of the interviews that you did, you say, 10 years ago, I didn't know how to use a computer.
Yeah. Up until the day I came to the States, so in June 1995, I arrived here. But I didn't own a computer. I mean, mate, you've got to cast your mind back. Well, not you. What year were you born, Ashton?
2000.
What?
2000.
Yeah, so you were
Yeah.
5.
Yeah.
Okay. The thing was that people didn't really own computers. Well, not in my world. I didn't own a computer. Why would I have a computer? I don't need a computer. I don't want a computer. Yeah, so I showed up here and Hans locked me in a room and said, you better learn Cubase because how are you going to help me? I'm like, oh, okay. So that's why that was quite a transition. But I didn't realize that learning to be a film composer involved learning to be a computer programmer. I'd have never thought that was where my life would take me. But, I got into it and I loved it. And there was something about it, and not so much the computery bit of it, but just this whole being able to have an orchestra at your fingertips, just that whole kick was just unbelievable. I know you know how that feels.
Yeah. But your demos sound amazing. Like you're a tremendous programmer. And
Hans was very, he was quite a stickler for that. He wasn't going to... I mean, I remember I think the second film I worked as his assistant on and did additional music on was Broken Arrow. It was an action film. And to be honest, I really didn't see myself as an action man. I never wanted to write any action music. I don't particularly like action films. It was completely out of my wheelhouse. Whereas the first film that I'd written for, and the reason I'd come to assist Hans, and he wanted me over here, was Muppet Treasure Island. Now, that was in my wheelhouse, having done several years teaching children and writing music for my kids I was teaching. That's the only composing I'd ever done. So I think, it's kind of silly and childish. I thought, yeah, that was kind of in my wheelhouse. So this action movie, this brutal action movie,
Damn, what a rush!
it didn't suit me at all. Didn't suit me at all. And also, suddenly the template, Hans's template, was non-orchestral. So everything I knew, I wasn't allowed to use. So I'm like, well, how are we going to make any sounds? Where does the melody, where does the harmony get generated? He's like, the fucking synths. What do you think? So you better learn how to use these synths. But his room was very alarming because I didn't have any gear, or I put me in a little room with a couple of broken bits of gear. But my main use was to sit on his seat when he wasn't there, which wasn't much. He was there kind of 19 hours a day. But it was quite alarming because for that film, he had rigged up all sorts of, there were sort of MIDI leads and audio leads winding across his studio, and you had to kind of step over it, and there were controllers that I'd never seen before that we hadn't used on Muppet Treasure Island that were controlling reverbs and delays and firing off all sorts of... And I was like, I didn't want to touch anything because I was sending like programs all over the program changes to all these synths. But I did, and it was mainly in the middle of the night. I would jump on a cue that he was working on and try and take it forward till he arrived at lunchtime the next day. But so I got a great love of these things. But it was a pretty shaky beginning, I can tell you. he was kind of a mad professor with all this stuff hanging off the walls, and I don't know, it was modular synths. I had no idea what I was doing, but gradually, you know, and he knew that, and he said, look, just go for it, just twiddle some knobs, see what happens. He said, that's what I did. And I'm like, yeah, right. No, you knew exactly what's going on everywhere. But, you know, and that's kind of was my beginning into it. And I really got into it. And after that film, I didn't leave that behind. I can't remember what the next film was we worked on, maybe The Rock. But I took a bit of that forward in the little room that he gave me. I didn't have all the synths that he had, all the hard, and there were no software synths to speak of. So it was hardware synths or none. But he had a couple of old broken ones lying around, which I managed to plug in. But I kind of took that forward, and I suppose that culminated in 3 or 4 years later, having the confidence to do Phone Booth, which was a completely...
With Joel Schumacher.
Yeah, but it was a completely synth score.
Yeah.
There was not a organic thing on it. You alluded to my programming being quite decent these days, but there was a reason for it, because I remember on that film, actually, when we did Broken Arrow, I only did 3 or 4 cues that made it into the final thing, because as I don't think I was very good at what Hans wanted me to do on that film. But I remember we were mixing one of my cues. Alan Merson was in the mix room at Media Ventures, and you know, he came through to my room and said, I want to do your cue, you know, this sort of action cue or whatever it was that I'd done. So, you know, come through and have a listen. So I was in the mix room there. Hans wasn't around. He was probably writing in his room. And it all sounded okay, but it was the drums kind of sounded like a cacophony of sound. It didn't sound very clear to me, but I was like, I think it's okay. And that Hans came and he said, okay, let's have a listen. So he had a listen to it. And he went over to the board and he started soloing things. And I'm like, oh, shit. And he soloed the hi-hat track. And he went...
So the programming was choppy.
I said, what the hell's that?
Yeah.
So I said, and you couldn't really hear it, but, you know, it sounded like I must have put my elbow on the bloody keyboard, or it quantized them all to the wrong bits. Yeah. And in the greater scheme of things, you couldn't notice it, but he happened to solo it just then. He's like... that you can never let that happen again, Harry. It has to be absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect.
Is it true that everything had to be quantized to the grid for the most part?
Yeah. But loosely quantized. I mean, there's a difference between quantizing something absolutely on the grid and quantizing it and allowing it to be off slightly.
Yeah.
You know, Hans has got a great feel, his stuff. So that's how that's achieved, not just by hitting quantize and everything locking to that. But no, there were just blemishes in my programming there, and it was, you know, he forgave me. He wasn't angry, but he's like, that can't happen. You can't do that. You cannot do that. And I was really embarrassed. I couldn't believe that that's what had happened. But you know, it turned out that I actually began to take great pride in the way my demos sounded, and you know, he would tell me, you know, this is how you'll make a career for yourself, because people have got a lot of choice, Harry. And if you can collaborate with a director, filmmakers, and they can really hear what you're up to, not approximately hear, but really hear how this might sound with a full orchestra or whatever it is, you know, that'll be the path, one of the paths to success.
What's the biggest thing in terms of the film business that you learned from Hans when working with him? The way that he communicated with directors and filmmakers.
Yeah, well, that, obviously he was a bit of a champion at that. Someone said to me, they were talking about production music, and said that if Hans released, this was before he had anything to do with it, if Hans released a CD with nothing on it, it would probably make him money. Right. I'm like, what do you mean by that? I don't understand what that comment means. But I kind of came to understand it. Yeah. But the regard that he was, high regard that he was held in. But no, I mean, he it was invaluable. Those 2 or 3 films that I worked with him on before I started getting my own films and started not really working for him, working beside him. You know, I had my room at Media Ventures and he had his room, and we were working on different films, rather like when he did Gladiator. I was there, but I've got no memory of it. I didn't contribute at all. And the reason would have been I would have been doing a Shrek or a something at that time. But no, those first 3 films that I worked on, and actually beyond, in the first DreamWorks movies that I did, he was obviously the head of music or whatever his position was at DreamWorks, and he would come to the meetings. And he could be quite destructive, but he could also be extremely constructive. I mean, when I say destructive, he wasn't shy about saying, "I don't hear the tune. You call that a tune?" I'm like, "Hans, Jeffrey said he likes it." Oh, okay.
It sort of goes back to what many people say about it, which is his great ear. He has a great ear for music.
No. So in the way he interacted with the filmmakers and all that was invaluable, to be a fly on the wall in a few of those things. And then, I learned a lot from him, as you know.
You've had the privilege of working with some really phenomenal directors. You think about Ridley, you think about Tony, you think about Anton Fuqua, you think about, Andrew Adamson, all these great filmmakers.
Joel Schumacher.
Yeah, talk to me about building these relationships and what these relationships mean to you individually as a person, but also as a creative and as a
Well, I think we were talking before rolling the cameras here that I wish I would have had more time with Joel Schumacher and Tony Scott and Dan Ireland, actually. There are three directors I did multiple films for. Danny had a stroke and died quite a long time ago now. But, without him, I probably wouldn't be sat here. I mean, I could say that about a lot of people, Hans Zimmer being one. But I probably wouldn't, because I think in the first 4 or 5 months of me being here, now, when's Hans's birthday? It's in the fall. Hans had a birthday.
September, I think.
Yeah, right. Hans had a birthday, and he said, do you want to come to my birthday dinner? So I said, well, yeah, sure, great. So I think all he wanted was a ride. He didn't have a driving license, so I had to drive him to, it was in Beverly Hills somewhere. And we went there, and it was just a small group of people. And I was sitting opposite someone who took quite an interest in me. It turned out to be Dan Ireland. And by the end of the evening, when Hans and I were about to go back to the studio, obviously, continue with whatever film we were doing, Dan caught me before we left and said, Harry, do me a favour. I've produced a couple of films that Hans works on. That's how I know him. But I've directed my first film. It's called The Whole Wide World. And I've got this new actress, Renée Zellweger, in it. And it would be incredible if Hans would do the score. Can you put in a word for me, or something like that? So I said, well, okay, I could mention it. But why don't you ask him yourself? He said, I have. And he was non-committal. So in the car on the way back to the studio that night, I said to Hans, man, so it's a really nice guy, this Dan Ireland. Obviously loves you and admires you. And he really wants to try and get his film to Sundance, and he needs a score quite quickly. And he said, well, how don't you do it? So I was like, what? But he doesn't want me. He said, well, we'll do it as Hans and Harry. Actually, Harry and Hans. I'm like, listen, man, I don't care which way around it is. I don't give a crap. And so that's how that turned out. So I don't know what the conversation was, but Dan had to make do with me, basically. But it was a really emotional film, and I'll never forget him coming in and listening to the kind of climax of that movie, which was a very sad, moving moment, and weeping, crying in my seat. And I said, Danny, what the hell's wrong? He's like, I'm just so moved, Harry. I want you to compose everything I ever do. And I did. we did get into Sundance. They didn't win or anything, but that's what Danny wanted. He died a long time ago now, but and Tony Scott and Joel Schumacher both passed, but yeah, Ridley's still knocking them out.
Music to me is language. It's the final dialogue. It gives the film that added dynamic as and when you may need it.
And this is the thing again that is quite remarkable, is the fact that Ridley is 86 and he might as well be 55. Yeah. He's still working incredibly, all the time. How has he changed over the years since the 20 years that you began working with him?
Not much.
Kingdom of
Not
Heaven?
much. He's still incredibly engaged, encouraging. He's a very visual director, as you know. I mean, he really is. And I've discovered that I'm much better off. I don't really like talking up a big game. I prefer any conversation to be as a reaction to some music that I've written.
Good, Red. That's going to be not too shabby.
Yeah.
That's going to be more exciting, I think.
Can we be left with a umbilical right through the next scene where he's talking about the machines, the engines, protect the engines, blah, 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 until he comes through and says, quiet, everybody quiet. Yeah? So we're going to have some connection there.
Absolutely. This will carry on.
Great.
And it's not going to be a huge orchestral sound, but it's slightly more military, I think.
That sometimes a director will want to play a piece of temp and tell you how it's working for him, which is all fine and understandable, but it makes you really nervous if that piece of music is kind of brilliant and working perfectly. I don't really like those conversations, but with Ridley it's not like that. It doesn't really use temp music, and I will quite quickly work up a small suite of music or something I really want to play him, and then we engage in a conversation. But he hasn't changed in his approach as far as I can see.
One of the things that I love most about your music is your choral writing. I've always admired it, and many people wouldn't know that you were once a choir boy in your very early years. Yes. What has your choral writing? Because I mean, even most recently with the Last Duel, when you worked with Voces 8, that's a part of your music that's so visceral.
Yeah. Well, that was a real pleasure. Well, I maybe unintentionally surrounded myself with like-minded people. One of my assistants, Stephen Barton, who also was a chorister years after me. Dave Buckley, similarly, who was a brilliant assistant of mine back in the day.
You worked on with the town.
Yeah, we co-composed that score, and he has a choral background. But there's something about we kind of understand each other. There's something unspoken about, I don't know, harmonies and sort of harmonic shifts that we would have sung as children over and over again. That's kind of ingrained into us. I speak for myself, but I can't speak for them. But I know that they feel it as well. I sense it because I sense it, and I can hear it in their music. It's difficult to explain. It sounds like it's holier than thou, but it's not. It's not about a religious overtone. It's more about the music that we, as a boy chorister, day after day for 5 or 6 years. The music that we had to sing on a daily basis, had to learn, sight read, to perform. It's quite specific in its harmonies. It's not something you forget. And it's quite an influence. Working with different sized choirs has always been attractive to me. Yeah. And I think I first, it was Kingdom of Heaven, where I was introduced to the Bach choir, because they're a bit like a sort of ocean liner of a choir. Huge. They're huge. And got to give them a few minutes
Right.
notice if you want them to slow down or change direction. But they're wonderful, and one can have 80 or 120 of them, and then a much smaller, more focused choir, and then down to Voces 8, who Stephen Barton suggested to me on The Last Duel, because he being an ex-chorister himself, he knows what really would appeal to me, and I wasn't aware of them as a group, but he had either worked with them or knew about them, and heard some of what I was writing and thought it would work really well. And then going even smaller down to Grace Davison, who's soloist.
Yeah.
But on Gladiator II, I was able to find all manner of different vocalists, soloists, as well as the choral contribution. One element that's a little surprising, and it might surprise you to hear how I came about finding it, was a vocal element I needed, which needed to be kind of North African, not Lisa Gerrard, not any of the other vocalists that I had been deploying for other moments in the score, but over a cue that I was writing for Arashat at the beginning of the movie. It needed to be definitely kind of ethnic North African thing, and I had a few people come into the studio and try. I couldn't find a voice that spoke to me in the right way, and I was pointed towards an a cappella track on Spotify on a record. It was a perfect vocal. It was like a 2.5 minute track, and I really liked it, and I could imagine how I could utilize it over the track that I had for Arashat. So I asked my music coordinator to find the singer who's got a long Ethiopian name I can't pronounce, but she was known as Gigi. And no one could find her. She was last seen in San Francisco. This record had been made 20 years ago or 25 years ago. And there was no trace of her. So I didn't drop it. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to sample the damn thing. So it was a cappella, so I could. There was no accompaniment to it. So I shoved it into Cubase, the whole track. And that actually chose about 6 or 8 seconds of the bit that I really liked, transposed it, harmonized it.
Is this what's in the final score?
Yeah, I called Paramount and said, look,
Yeah.
you're going to have to license it. Give her a credit and do what you have to do. But I've never done that before, like literally sample something I put into it. But as I couldn't find her, that was the only path open to me. And I had played it for Ridley, who really liked it. So I was like, well, we kind of got our hands tied here.
Right. Hans has always been very proud, I think, of you because he found you, he discovered you, and he brought you up, but also he's been able to see you become your own composer and have your own career. When you call him, once you've secured Gladiator II and you tell him about it, what's the conversation like between you two at that point?
He just said, look, go and make yourself, I don't know, I think he said, go make me proud. But he said, yeah, come on, what are you talking about? Get on with it. Do yourself justice and you'll have fun. This sequence we've got up here is the Roman invasion of Numidia at the beginning of the film, Gladiator. So I wanted to be in 7/8 for whatever reason. It's mostly 7/8. There's a couple of 2/4, 4/4 bars. Looks like I'm trying to make up time there by adding a little eighth in there. We can see a bit later why I had to do that. But sometimes I find it quite useful to throw in a bar that doesn't really belong. Particularly in 7/8, I didn't want to get into the ching, chong, cha, pa, pa, kong, kong, kong too much, too quickly. What do we got here? We've got, let's highlight the string track. Let's see what we've got. A little riff here. I actually have my friend Martin Tillman playing. Let's see, so we can find him. He's just giving us something a little different. It's kind of like the violins. It just adds a little je ne sais quoi. These guys, which I've been using quite extensively, these kind of slipping, sliding strings are really appealed to me, and actually later in the film become thematic to Macronus, although we haven't met him here. The detail of where everything lands I could do later. That's actually one of the assets of having quite a quick tempo and making it 7/8, because I could, if I needed to hit any particular event, I could divide the beat and quite easily achieve that.
And you're getting different cuts of this picture as
oh
it's
yeah,
evolving.
my goodness, yeah. So when I first wrote this particular sequence, it was probably 10 or 12 minutes long. In the final film, I think it's about 7 or 8 minutes long. So I was able to throw out all the crap. So I was able to, I don't, those bars that sound like they're copy bars or repeating, I'm going to take them out. So I was able to hone down the cue to something approaching what I really wanted to do with it. So yes, what we're listening to right now is my demo. Now we're listening to the orchestra at Abbey Road. Ridley wanted to almost stop the music track here when Lucius spots Acacius. He said, what does it sound... I remember he called me and said, Harry, what would it sound like if there was silence? So I said, are you asking me what silence sounds like? He said, yeah, what's our version of silence? That's what I'm asking you. I'm like, okay, I get it. Okay, well, we won't have utter silence, but we... he said, I don't want a heartbeat, but it's that kind of a moment. Lucius spots Acacius, and time stands still for a moment. So I tried many things in this. It's just going to be for 3 or 4 beats, really, and then it's going to take off again. I tried many things without success, and then realized I did need something akin to a heartbeat of some sort. It didn't need to do ba-boom, ba-boom, but something low. But all the activity from the strings needed to stop. And I've always liked, maybe going back to, I don't know, Muppet Treasure Island, when I discovered on one of Hans's timp samples, which I maybe even have here, which of course a timp player can do with this pedal. He can actually... And I remember on Muppet Treasure Island having some comedic effect like that, and really enjoying it. However, how does that relate to? How does it relate to this movie? Well, I threw it in here. Let's have a look. The percussion is quite extensive, and what I tend to do is, after I've programmed it, record it into audio so that I can then really manipulate it, perhaps change the focus of the reverbs and delays, EQ. I find I can handle it better if I've already separated it out into audio files, as opposed to quite often on the same MIDI track. There would be multiple things going on, events that I'm triggering, and I don't necessarily want them all to be the same volume or the same reverb or the same impact. So if I've got them, I've had one of my guys would have, let's have a look, separated things out. It looks like I did some live playing here. going too heavy with the percussion in a scene like this is not productive. There's so much depends on sound effects.
What about on a scene like the monkey attack, where the percussion is super up
Yeah,
front? And
absolutely.
forward?
Yeah, no, that was just going to be percussion. There's very little else going on there. Some really wild African flutes, a little bit of African vocalization, but mostly, as you point out, it's percussion, and that was a creative decision early on between me and Ridley. It's just stay away from, it's very earthy, it's very organic, it's very almost tribal. I'd listened to Hans's score, obviously, for the first one, and the most memorable thing that popped out of me is this dee-da-dee-dom, in a very Hans... the falling seventh. So I thought to myself, if I could... Well, I wonder what I can do with that. So there's a track called Strength and Honor on the soundtrack, and that's what I wrote using a falling seventh. And from that, it's quite heroic. I had to kind of wheel back to a place and create a theme for him that contained that falling seventh, so that when we got to the end of the film and I really wanted to hit the audience over the head with Hans's tune, it felt like it was intrinsically belonged to the very fabric of the movie.
We also sort of hear that in I See Him in You, that cue, you hear the theme in the horn. Tell me about that moment where he sort of evolves into the Maximus theme, because there's that big statement of the theme.
It's great fun, sort of back timing things, thinking how am I going to get to a place in this movie where it feels right to play the main theme from the previous movie. With conversations with Ridley, it was clear that I didn't need to be doing that too often. Ridley said, just pick your spots. So I think there were two places where I verbatim quote Hans's tune. One is towards the end of the film, where in the script it literally says it's at this point that Lucius becomes Maximus. So I thought, okay, well, that's where my Lucius theme needs to reveal itself to actually be a little brother, first cousin, second removed, to Hans's tune.
And then what is the experience like, for instance, when you go to these premieres and you see the cast, you see the people that you've been seeing on your monitor for a year, what's the experience like celebrating?
Well, it's great, and actually I learned a lot from, I've had to do a few panels, Q&A panels, with the craft people, the editors, the casting director, the production designer, Arthur Max, the costumer, Janty Yates, and it's fascinating hearing, when someone asks them questions about how they came to do this and that. No, it's fascinating. I mean, it's amazing that it literally takes an army to make a film like this. And it's just fascinating listening to the heads of those departments talk about their challenges. And they're quite similar, but they're different to what we do as composers. I mean, a lot of them are pre-production or production. The film has been designed by the time we come to it. I mean, it hasn't been edited fully, but the costumes have been worn. But it's just fascinating listening to what their points of reference were. Yeah. And they're quite similar to mine.
If you could pick any one of those other gigs, what would it be?
Production designer.
Designer.
No doubt. What an amazing guy, Arthur Max.
Tremendous.
Yeah, incredible. And, both Scott brothers, actually, I always thought the production design on Tony's films were beautiful. I always wanted to have a bedroom that looked like Peter's from Man on Fire. Yeah.
Yeah.
And hopefully the light and the way that the curtains billowed in the half light. But Tony had such a beautiful eye as well. Yeah. But as we know, sort of Ridley.
Yeah, absolutely. The main character in The Martian is Mark Watney, who, when everything is going to shit, he somehow finds a way of being optimistic. He's left on a planet. Yeah. When you're having struggles in your life, whether it's a film trying to find the right thing, how do you approach it with a Mark Watney attitude? How do you find your way through it?
I'm very fortunate to live in in a spot where I jump out of here and I can be in some woods over there, or I can be on a tennis court. And I like to physically challenge myself, because I think a lot of what we do sat in a room like this is quite draining mentally, and it takes a lot from us. In fact, one of the posters downstairs, you'll see one of my favorite posters is the Spy Game one, and Tony has written on it, I think he wrote, each one takes a big piece of us. Well done, H. But you know, he's right, it really does, and has done. And probably should do as well, if we give it everything we've got. But so yeah, in answer to your question, I think physical exercise, whether that's interacting with my many children, which is very physical, as I've got some busy little ones, or challenging myself physically on a tennis court or something like that.
There's going to be a lot of composers that are watching this that admire you and admire the career that you've built and the scores that you've written. It's a classic question, but I think it's especially relevant now when it's such a fascinating landscape in the industry with streaming, with TV, with everything else. What is your words of advice for someone coming up in our current modern day and age as a composer, especially based on the composers that you meet every day?
I think to have heart, to have staying power, to stay committed, to focus, to trying to achieve your dreams, because there's more and more platforms that need music. I mean, almost everything, every app, there's so much music needed, and I truly believe that there's a spot for everybody. You know, if you've gone off and had a reasonable music education, that would probably help first and foremost. But if you passionately think, you know, really have a desire to write, to picture, you know, many people call themselves film composers, but not that many people actually do films. You know, they're maybe doing video games or TV or music for any number of things that aren't films. But if you're fortunate, if you particularly want to do films, that's quite specific, and there aren't that many to go around. But if you broaden your search for work to music for media, for any media, I do believe there's a spot for everybody in this. There's so much fun to be had, and there's so much scope and depth to what can be achieved. I mean, if you think about it, you turn on your phone, every app has music. The video game industry looks really interesting to me now. It actually didn't back in the day when I got involved in it. But you know, it seems that there's so much fun to be had in that area for a composer.
Last question for you is about happiness, and it's more so about how you find your happiness. Is it through when you're working? Is it when you're seeing the reactions of people once the film is?
No, I'm generally not happy at all at the end of a film. That sounds a bit counterintuitive. I'm happy to have made the journey. I think trying to enjoy the journey most of all, as opposed to the result, that's where I'm better off. You might ask why. The answer is I was just at the premiere of Gladiator II last night. I can't be happy with it. I'm going to want to have the mix differently, or I'm going to want to have played a theme slightly differently in a certain place. I just naturally, that's how I'm going to be, so I'm not going to be happy. So I would rather be happier for the longest period of time in the creating of that. So I think that's for me, that's the key to finding happiness, is to enjoy the journey as much as I can, because the final result, it's difficult to. I can enjoy Man on Fire now, it's so far away, or Phone Booth or Shrek or something like that, but it's tough for me to anything I've done recently. It feels so fresh that I could have changed this, I could have done better here. So I'm a bit too self-critical in that department. But I have learned to enjoy the journey. Yeah. And the journeys are varied and they can be long and arduous, but they're there to be enjoyed.
Well, I bug you all the time on how much your Narnia score, for instance, has meant to me in my life. And I think for many people watching this, your music has sort of been really the soundtrack to their lives. And so on behalf of all of us, thank you for your work and thank you for what you do. Telling stories.
Thank you.